Heritage Google Plus Hangout Heritage and the Free Beacon Google Plus Hangout. Today I'm Erica Anderson from the Heritage Foundation, and today we're going to be talking about Obamacare and the many things that have gone wrong with it. Everything from PolitiFacts calling Obama out for the lie of the year, to some of those interesting healthcare ads they've been putting out, to all the costs and regulations that it's costing small businesses. So today I'm joined by 5 panelists. Our first panelist is Congressman Roger Williams of Texas. He's been very outspoken on this issue on the House floor, and we really want to get his perspective and what he's been hearing from constituents. Next up, we have Ben Domenech of the Federalist. Ben has written a lot about these issues. He's a research fellow at the Heartland Institute, so we want to get his perspective. We also have Ben Downs, who is a small business owner who has been extremely affected by the cost of Obamacare, so we want to hear what he has to say about that. And we're also joined by Allie Singer, who is a expert here in healthcare at the Heritage Foundation. And then we have Elizabeth Harrington, a reporter, healthcare reporter from the Washington Free Beacon. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Hopefully we can get a little bit of conversation going here. I'm going to start with the congressman, if you guys don't mind, but anyone can feel free to jump in. Congressman, you recently said in a floor speech that 19 provisions of Obamacare have actually been amended, repealed, or delayed. What do you think it is that stops lawmakers like Harry Reid from admitting that this thing just wasn't crafted well?
Well, this is pretty simple. This is the president's signature piece of legislation, and they're seeing it blow up right in front of their very face. They're trying to do everything they can to slow that process down. But quite frankly, I think America will agree this is probably the worst legislation we've seen in certainly my lifetime, and as being a small business owner like some of your other panelists, it's devastating to small business because we just don't know where to go, and the costs are skyrocketed, and it literally, as they say, is a disaster. But it's his signature piece of legislation. They're seeing it fall through the cracks. They're going to do everything to try to protect it. But I think frankly, the way it's going now, it's going to take care of itself.
Yeah, and speaking of the cost of small businesses, I know you're a small business owner, and Ben Downs, you're also a small business owner. Could you talk a little bit, Mr. Downs, about how it's affected your business?
The issue that I'm dealing with is the fact. No, that's the other Ben. The issue that I'm dealing with is the fact we really don't know what's going on. We find ourselves trying to make plans for the future. We can't really just delay something or postpone it for a few months. Otherwise, our competition is going to run right over us. We have to know how much it's going to cost and how much money we have to spend on things. And we don't. I was taught to try to put off the effects of Obamacare. Our insurance carrier asked us if we would consider re-upping our insurance and changing the effective date to be December 1st of this year, just so we would have 11 months of 2014 before everything took effect. We did that, and it was a good thing we did because we see that our carrier, Blue Cross, is going to have 20 to 25% increase on our insurance coverage for next year, and we're a young group. We're a radio station, as you can tell from the name Bryan Broadcasting, but we're a young group, and to be looking at a 20 to 25% premium increase, how do you budget for something like that when it just suddenly pops up in a 60-day period? Well, the answer is you can't.
Yeah. Allie, I know that you've done some writing on, sort of the costs and the things that are hitting small businesses. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've researched about how it's affecting small businesses?
Sure, and as he was mentioning, there's a 25% premium increase, and trying to figure out how you budget within your business for that. A lot of this is another way that people are losing their existing plans. So you can't keep the health plan that you had because your employer is trying to figure out a way to adapt to the new environment. So that's what we saw with UPS earlier this year. They listed the increased costs that they're having from Obamacare. They said that they're going to drop spouses that have coverage through their employer off of their plan. So these are people who can't keep their health plan because of Obamacare's cost increases. So it just goes to show you that people losing their plans isn't just in the individual market. That's where the media is focusing on today, but it certainly affects Americans no matter where they purchase insurance.
Okay, thanks. Ben, Dominic, you have written a lot about the polling, showing basically that youth are not signing up for this, Hispanics don't like it. Actually, the majority of the country is very untrustworthy, untrusting of it. Could you talk about some of the polling results that you've written about?
Sure. One of the things that I think that we have to appreciate about this is that, all along, all that Obama really had to do to make sure that Obamacare was permanent was to make sure that it worked. And what we mean when we say that it worked is that it worked for the majority of Americans, that the majority of Americans viewed it as a good thing. What we've actually seen since the law has gone into effect is a spike in the number of people who don't trust the government to manage their health care, a spike in the number of people who are in favor of delay. We see majorities of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans now in favor of delay. And frankly, the latest polling that we have from Fox, which just came out, was done over the past couple of days, shows that 53% of Americans now favor full repeal of the law. 54% of Americans say that they wish that the law had never passed in the first place. This is, for a signature piece of legislation, that's not the kind of numbers that you want to see. And they're reacting to it not just because they know people who've lost their plans, as Ali was detailing, and as we've seen in the media, but also because they don't really trust that their own plans are going to be safe. And they're right to be concerned, because within the next year we're going to see the dominoes falling on all of these employer-sponsored plans, and in other areas as well, which frankly I think is sort of the next shoe to drop. The thing that we're going to see coming out in the early weeks of January is the doc shock. People running into the fact that even under these new plans, they're not going to be able to have access to the doctors and to the hospitals that they've gone to previously. And so I think that, all told, when you look at this thing, this is not the launch that the Obama administration wanted, and that's why they're engaging in these kinds of constant delays, pushbacks, and altering things just under the fiat of the President of the United States, not under the law, just in an attempt to try to cobble this thing together and to make it work long enough that they get enough millions of people invested in it that it can survive in the long term.
Can I ask Ben a question?
Sure.
You mentioned full repeal, and to me there are four pieces of this puzzle. We're talking about the financial costs, and but then there is the issue about morality of universal health care. Shouldn't people be able to go to the hospital if they're sick? But the part that bothers me the most is the lack of freedom, and then the Santa Claus aspect. I can't imagine the congressman being able to face up under the Facebook outrage machine if he were to make the centerpiece of his campaign getting rid of preventative health care for women and free birth control. I don't think anyone can stand up under that kind of assault that would come. You could stand up under it, but I'm not sure re-election would be in your cards. And so how do you see that repeal would be possible? And every time we do delay, that's another year that people are used to the Santa Claus aspect of this. Do you think?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons that I'm actually optimistic about repeal, and I think that it actually has to do with the idea that even if you look at some of these Santa Claus aspects of Obamacare, not only are they things that you can achieve without the kind of top-down regulation from Washington that you see under its approach, but they're also things that don't necessarily exist without an alternative. I think a good example of that is something like the birth control aspect, the preventive health care for women that you talk about. I don't think it's any mystery that men, particularly young men, use doctors and use the healthcare system completely differently than young women do, which is one of the reasons why I think it's important for conservatives generally, for people who support a free market solution, to shift to an approach that says, look, these things aren't free. They're coming from your insurer, but they're built into the cost of the premium, which is why you're seeing your premium go up. We want to offer you a different alternative, which just basically says, look, we don't want to require your employer to have to provide this because it's going to go against their religious liberty. But instead, we want you to be able to purchase it because we want your employer to be able to pay you more. We want your employer to be able to put that money in an HSA and allow you to buy it over the counter. There's no reason that these drugs that ought to be available over the counter have to be hidden behind them and require you to go to the doctor first. And secondly, you have to keep in mind Obamacare takes away the power to purchase things over the counter with your HSA and things of that nature. So I think there's an easy alternative on a lot of these fronts. When you actually step back and look at sort of the Santa Claus aspect of this, that really, in terms of the number of people affected, has a lot more to do with something like the Medicaid expansion, which I think you have to phase out of, and which you have to, push back against over the course of a couple of years, and maybe have a transition period. But keep in mind, we're already seeing that half the country essentially hasn't expanded Medicaid. You're seeing much fewer people in the system, and that makes, I think, from my perspective, repeal a lot more feasible in the sense that you have a much lower number of people who are dedicated to the system, who are locked into it, and who are therefore invested in its continued success.
Can I interject one thing to what Ben is saying?
Sure.
I believe repeal is, we can repeal. I mean, it gets political now, but let's not forget that 85% of the people had health care before President Obama got involved in the industry. 15% didn't, and now we're penalizing the 85%. I believe, and from a Republican standpoint, that the fix is the private sector. I mean, there's no reason that the federal government should control 1/6 of this economy. They've got a very bad track record of things that they've gotten involved in. But that's why that I've always talked about, and we continue to talk about, things like letting the individuals own their own health care. Not your employer, not the federal government. Individuals should own their own health care. We ought to be able to shop across state lines. There's 1,800 insurance companies right now that would be willing to bid on all of us, and we all know when you have competition, you bring prices down, you bring services up. Needs to be tax deductible, needs to be portable. So if you decide to leave your job and you get fired, you carry it with you rather than getting on COBRA, which nobody can afford. I mean, that's the model that we need to be talking about. That's the model that'll work. And the 15% don't have health care, we can talk to them and see what the issue is. But don't penalize the 85%. Get the government out of health care and let the private sector work, let competition work. Socialized medicine doesn't work. We're seeing that right now. People are pushing against it, and really it's time for this administration to get on with it and turn it back to the individuals. And I have also found small business owners like myself and Ben, if you got 60 employees, you're trying to get down to 49 so you don't comply. I mean, it's creating a backwards economy, and it's the worst legislation, as I said, that we've seen in our lifetime. Individuals need to own their own health care, not the federal government.
I'm sitting right at 45 employees. We're trying to buy a couple of radio stations, and I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to do the financing on the new radio stations we're buying, and yet I'm also trying to figure out how to keep from growing my staff too much. And the reason I'm doing it is because I've got to try to stay below 50, and that's a poor decision matrix. That's not the way that you grow the economy or you grow your business, trying to factor in how do I stay below 50.
Hey, I want to bring Elizabeth into the conversation just to jump to another area of Obamacare that has been a major problem for a lot of people. I think one of the scariest things is the security breaches that we've heard about. We reported here at Heritage about one man that signed up. He signed onto the website and found some other man's personal information, and then he actually contacted us. Told us about it. We wrote a story about it and we got it out there. And I know you've done some reporting on that, Elizabeth. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about what you've learned, the feedback that you've gotten on the security breach side of this.
Yeah, sure. Well, what we know is all the experts are saying that there was never any security built into the website. The website's 500 million lines of code, and all these experts are saying there's no security safeguards there. And so after the so-called fix, the administration was trying to fix the site, all they addressed was the traffic issues. They didn't address any of the security issues. So while more people may be able to access the site, that only means that there's more personal information that's vulnerable to hackers. And what we learned this week is that HHS knew that there were vulnerabilities with the security. I mean, one of the main contractors issued a report before the launch that said there's 19 areas of security risks that have not been addressed at all. And so the HHS is saying that there hasn't been any malicious attacks successfully. But I mean, there's no law requiring them to disclose if someone's personal information, which includes their social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, bank accounts, they aren't required to tell the people that their information has been compromised. So it's like, who do you trust? And so, yeah, the security here, it's a huge issue. The main expert there, David Kennedy, who's a white hat hacker, he advised Americans over a month ago in Congress, do not go on healthcare.gov because it's not safe. And then after the so-called fix, after November 30th, he said the situation's just worse because they've fixed 400 bugs, which means they changed code in 400 areas, which has a ripple effect. They didn't implement any security safeguards there. It's going to create more problems. And we just saw the Energy Department disclose when they had a cyber attack, over 100,000 of their employees' personal information was stolen. And so if another government agency isn't even protecting their own employees, I mean, how do we expect healthcare.gov to be safe and Americans' personal information to be safe on?
Yeah, and isn't the mandate penalty coming very soon, right? So it's like...
Oh, no. It's called a shared responsibility.
Oh, yes, of course. But I mean, you know, I'm just, it's like infuriating to think about the fact that people are going to be penalized for this, yet they can't even get on it, and if they do, their information is not secure. Congressman, have you heard anything about this side of things from any constituents, or have you been talking about this with any of your constituents?
Well, we have, and of course, people are really concerned about it because the bottom line is nobody trusts the federal government. I mean, why would you? And really, take it even further and go to the IRS. I would submit to you, when the morning we woke up and we saw what the IRS had done, and they hacked in and knew everything about us, was anybody surprised? I don't think so. So you couple what we are finding out with Obamacare, NSA, IRS, nobody trusts the federal government. We talk about it all the time, and it gets to a Fourth Amendment issue and that sort of thing. And my people in my district are very, very concerned about it. And this Obamacare is just one more attraction for the government to know more about you when they shouldn't be.
And if I could just add just one more thing, too, about the data hub. Although it doesn't retain information, it's basically a portal, a gateway into all these other federal agencies. So the IRS, DHS, all the different things they have to check for the subsidies, if you're a citizen or not. Hackers can get into the portal, and though there's not information that's saved there, they can get access to all these other different websites. So that's another problem with security.
Well, and this is my question, and I know this has been talked about over and over, but I'm curious to get anyone's opinion on this. How did they do this? I mean, how did they create this website so horribly, so carelessly, and then in addition to it, not working correctly, that the security is not there. I mean, how do you think that it got this far to the rollout, and then things just went disaster? What was the back-end conversation there?
Well, Erica, I think that one of the big things that sort of happened that sort of caused this was a decision that the administration made to really avoid the political pressure that they could receive from rolling out rules and regulations in a timely manner in advance of the website launch. They really sort of pumped the brakes on all of those things because of the 2012 election and not wanting to deal with negative news stories about that. That delayed all of the processes and really pushed this thing back well beyond the dates when it should have been ready to launch. We heard the warnings from Henry Chow and others in advance of it saying that they just wanted to avoid a third world experience and that kind of thing. But now what we know in retrospect is that they were getting warnings all the way up until launch about this thing not being ready, and then just decided to push ahead anyway. I think the lack of the administration's ability to really approach this issue with the level of importance that it really deserved is something that I'm sure that they regret very much, but really was motivated by their politically motivated interest in avoiding negative news stories in the 2012 election cycle.
I could see that.
Didn't you get a feel that this was kind of a let's throw a play in the barn? Actually, my wife's going to be upset if they keep showing the wrong Ben when I talk, but that's okay. Didn't you get the feeling that the people like me, like the congressman who actually have our feet on the ground, who write the checks, are going to, or were just ignored? It seems like that they hold us in such disdain, this administration does. that any opinion we had was simply seen as some sort of self-serving Simon Legree sort of thing. We could have pointed out some of these problems, but it seems like we were just, by gosh, going to do this, and good luck, and hope you like it.
Well, Ben, you're right, and from a business standpoint, I mean, from a business standpoint, this is probably the worst crafted rollout or business plan maybe seen in the history of the country. But there again, they're not business people in Washington. They live by what the political environment is, hour by hour. They don't look at small business as a viable product in our country, even though we supply half the workforce, half the payroll. And it was just disdain for the private sector, and it's come back, I think, to haunt them. And it's just truly a bad business plan. But when you focus on socialism versus capitalism, that's what you get. Well,
and then there's just the fact that you know, all of these exemptions. I mean, even the unions want exemptions. It's like I don't think President Obama has ever really addressed that. You know, we talk about it, but you know, he recently did this PR blitz across the country, which really was pretty. He didn't even look convinced himself, in my opinion. And does anyone know, has he addressed all the people that have been getting exemptions?
Addressed them how?
Well, just like admitted that it's happening. I don't know.
I think it's obvious thus far that the people aren't happy with this law. I mean, more Americans disapproved of the law when it passed, and more Americans have disapproved of it for the last 3 years, and more Americans disapprove of it than approve of it. So when it comes to figuring out what the American people want and then implementing it, this administration, when it comes to healthcare, doesn't seem to care.
Well, if it's good legislation, why do you need exemptions?
Exactly.
He grants the exemptions because it's not good legislation, but he ignores it. He has no answer for it. But if it worked, there wouldn't be exemptions.
Yeah.
I do think that it's important, and the congressman sort of spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I think it's important to keep in mind that the healthcare system prior to Obamacare actually had a lot of problems too. The biggest problem, of course, was one of cost, though, and that's why the president sold his legislation as the Affordable Care Act, as making care more affordable, making your premiums more affordable, promising that your premiums would go down by $2,500 per family, et cetera, et cetera. It's gone in the opposite direction, and it's done so because of his regulatory policies. But I think it's important that when conservatives, when free marketers talk about reforming healthcare going forward, they keep in mind that this is a much bigger thing than just Obamacare. The Great Society, the welfare state as a whole, the expansion of Medicaid in particular is a huge problem. It has to be addressed holistically in terms of reform to actually get back to a market-based system. Otherwise, you have sort of the worst of both worlds where, I mean, the general line that I would always say is nobody cares what something costs as long as somebody else is paying for it. And whether that's your insurer or whether it's the government, it's always going to drive up costs and it's going to lead to problems in the future. And that's the point that we're at right now, and it's why reform needs to happen.
Well, and I'm curious. Sorry.
With my feet on the ground, I checked one of the reasons that my policies are going to go up 25% next year is because my young people are going to are added in, of course, but they're actually going to have an increase in what they could find in the private marketplace. But the changes that are going to have to happen for the employees here, and I agree, the option is there for me just to toss everybody overboard and say, here's the website, go to it and handle it, but I don't feel comfortable about that. There's a slight bit of paternalism, I admit, in my comment, but I just feel like that we can do better together on our insurance here. But I have 5 people who have children, and yet everyone here next year is going to have coverage for pediatric dentistry. That's one of the new features of a requirement inside the new healthcare law, that we're going to have to offer acupuncture coverage, we're going to have to offer alternative medicine coverage, and the pediatric dentistry. My people don't need that, and the ones that do need it, I have a separate policy for it. But now it's going to be in everyone's policy. There's such a loss of freedom. We've really lost so much freedom in being able to pick and choose what's right for us. Now we're having to overstate it a little bit. Now we're having to choose a plan that's right for the collective, and that's just that's a freedom loss, and it's going to cost more, give us less, and we're going to lose our freedom to choose what's right for us.
Well, and I'm curious what you all think about what are the legacies of these, lawmakers that are and were very supportive of Obamacare. They're looking worse and worse as time goes on and more people dislike it. How's that going to look for them in the future? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I'll real quick. I think it's not going to look good for them. I mean, they voted for a model that doesn't work. Now, many of them, the last vote we took in Congress, we had 39 Democrats vote with us on an issue of reference to Obamacare. They're trying to backtrack. And everybody, if you have your own policy, you can keep it. The famous lines of all time. Many have given the president's speech. So I think it's going to be devastating to him. I feel like that from a political standpoint, it's going to help Republicans this next election, and maybe we will probably gain seats in the House. But I think it's a real problem for him. We see him backtracking, so they must think the same thing.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely going to be a huge problem for all these members that are on tape, just as Obama was, repeating that talking point promise that if you like your plan, you can keep it. I mean, the ads we just saw, Washington Post said this is the ad that every Democrat should fear. Forget which member it was against, but it's such a powerful ad to show, no, you can keep your plan. It's totally fine. And then we obviously know millions of people, millions of Americans, that's not the case. So that's a huge advantage for Republicans, you got to think, in 2014.
Well, and today, Allie actually, she wrote a brief about, the 10 broken promises of Obamacare, but we were talking and saying, the main broken promise that people, remember is if you like your plan, you can keep it, but Allie, can you tell us a couple of the other broken promises that aren't quite as well known?
Sure. So does anyone remember the pledge that he would tax any family making less than $250,000 a year? Well, his law contains 18 tax hikes that are going to generate over $770 billion worth of new tax revenue. So that one has certainly been broken. While some taxes are focused on the high income, many are not, and of course we all know that taxes get passed on to the consumer in a variety of ways. So that's a big one. He promised his law would increase choice and competition, but an analysis of what the exchange plans actually look like in the states shows that on the county level, 17% of the counties in the United States will have no choice when it comes to an insurer on their exchange. And when 35% will only have a choice of 2. So we're looking at over 50% of the United States as counties with a duopoly or monopoly. So certainly no increased choice or competition in the exchanges.
All right, thank you. Okay, guys. Well, we've about hit 10:30, so we're gonna wrap it up. I just want to thank you guys for coming on and having the conversation again. I know we talk about Obamacare a lot, but I mean, there's so many things to reinforce and discuss. So thanks for coming on, and everybody have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you a lot. Merry Christmas.